Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, we've been talking about access to digital scholarly content, to be more specific. There's an initiative underway called Seamless Access that can be described as very simple in concept but difficult in execution. Let me explain why. Seamless Access, which you can learn more about at seamlessaccess.org, is a coalition-backed standard for digital authentication that enables a single sign-on. That's it. And yet this process has been a long-standing problem for researchers who simply want to log into a publishing platform, whether on campus or off, and locate a journal article or other piece of digital scholarly content that's included in their institution's subscription package. The usual IP-based access a researcher has via their institution has been working less well, especially as a single sign-on. And the problem has become so acute that it's causing a critical mass of researchers to bypass that process altogether and locate the content they need on freely available sites, whether legally or illegally. It's a frustrating user experience for researchers, and it's an alarming development for publishers and institutions who are seeing a decline in usage of some very expensive content. Seamless Access emerged from the guidelines established by the RA21 initiative, and joining me to talk more about how it works are Heather Flanagan, Program Director at seamlessaccess.org, and Laird Barrett, Digital Product Manager at Springer Nature, which was one of the first publishers to implement the Seamless Access service. In this final episode of our four-part series brought to you by Springer Nature, Laird talks about how libraries can get a seat at the Seamless Access table and what's involved in the implementation. Okay, so Laird, publishers aren't necessarily actively requesting data from end users as they initiate the process with initiate the access through Seamless Access. Nevertheless, I don't think there's any kind of standardized way to handle this process, and I believe seamlessaccess.org is developing or has a working group to address this issue. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So Heather runs a group, an attribute release group that's looking at how you might standardize that process. So how you might have a standard way of requesting no attributes, or what an institutional identity provider might expect in that case, and to know to send nothing back, or. There's also a possibility. One of the great things about federated access is it can work as both an individual and an institutional authentication method. So if there are instances where you want to enable that between a service provider like a publisher and an institution, that group is talking about a standard way to do that, including how you make the end user in this case possibly a researcher know and be able to have a choice over what data is shared back with the service provider. And I think when it comes to those conversations about sort of privacy and releasing individual attributes through that federated authentication method, I think it is worth keeping in mind the researcher's experience and the researcher's choice. And so if it would make a researcher's life easier for them to be able to both institutionally and individually authenticate through one method, which it might do in some cases, then I think it's important to facilitate a way to do that and to do it in a way that it's transparent to the user what data is being shared, and that's essentially partly what that attribute release working group that Heather leads up is working on.
Okay, excellent. So earlier we sort of, libraries entered the conversation, and I'm wondering, Laird, from your perspective or the publisher's perspective, what kind of consultation, if any, or interaction with libraries you might be having regarding the implementation of Seamless Access. If they were to initiate this, what would they need to do? Keeping in mind, like we talked about, there might be some other division or group within the institution who would handle the technical aspects of this.
Yeah. So again, I think there's a difference between the federated authentication method that an institution might enable with a publisher, and the seamless access experience of that federated authentication method, which a publisher will implement on their site to make that experience easier for the end user. So I think in terms of the consultation, so we've always taken the approach of enabling the federated authentication method when an institution comes and asks us to do so, and it's quite a small percentage of our institutional customers who have asked for us to do so. I think about 2,500 of them in total.
Okay.
And what we did when we rolled out the seamless access experience of federated authentication on nature.com in November is we did communications out to our librarian customers. So I ran a webinar that you can go and find on the Springer Nature corporate website that explained what we were implementing, what the experience was, and solicited questions from people. And I responded to all the questions that we got back from librarians who attended. It was pretty well attended. I think 400 or 500 librarians came along across sort of North America and Europe and Asia to hear that webinar. And we issued sort of press releases and information about implementing the experience. I think as part of that consultation, we did tell everybody, if you want to enable federated access with us, you can do that. We provide informational pages on nature.com or on our other platforms like SpringerLink that give you instructions about how to do that. And that process is primarily getting in touch with us, our customer services department, to say, hi, I want to enable federated authentication. Here's I'm this customer. Here's the entity ID of my institutional identity provider. Can you go ahead and switch that on for us? And in most cases, we already have that institution's identity provider's metadata stored on our side through either their federation or through EduGain, which is the sort of global federation for that metadata. And often the institution themselves have the necessary data on their side about our service provider that their IT department has also ingested through a federation or through EduGain, for example. So often the pieces, the data exchange and the technical pieces are already in place. It's just a matter of the institution getting in touch and saying, hey, I want you to enable federated authentication for my institution, and we can go ahead and get that switched on. And then because we've implemented the seamless access experience of federated authentication on nature.com, if it's for nature.com, then the users just get that slightly better experience of the authentication method.
Okay, great. So I'm curious. You mentioned the webinar that you put on this and took some questions at the end. I'm wondering if you had any takeaways from or sort of thoughts about those questions. Like what were some of the subject areas that the questions tended to gather around? What were some of the major concerns from the participants?
Yeah, so I think some of the concerns, at least we heard, was particularly in Europe, I think less so in North America from the European librarians and less so from the North American librarians, was that question around privacy. I think at some point, for some reason, I don't know how it happened exactly. I guess these things do happen, but privacy concerns and seamless access got connected at some point. I assume because through the authentication method, you can pass back a user's individual data. But again, this is completely in the control of the institutional identity provider, whether they do that. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the questions were about privacy, and I did my best to explain, some of the things that we've explained here today. Again, about release of that data being within the institutional identity provider's control, the fact that we don't request that data on our end, and if it is sent through to us, we throw it away currently. And also talk about, again, the end user researcher's experience and how their life could be made easier by having a method to both institutionally and individually authenticate, and I think they should have the choice to be able to do that, but that choice and what data of theirs is being shared should be transparent to them. There's some I think there was largely positive feedback about the broader effort to ease authentication and access for researchers. I think there's some acknowledgement and knowledge amongst librarians that is an end user problem.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned the sort of the questions that came from the European attendees of that webinar versus the North American ones, and I wonder if you could dig into that a little bit in terms of talking about the breakdown of complying institutions between North America and the rest of the world. I mean, are you noticing a difference in attitudes and or policies, within those regions, if at all?
I think federated access or federated authentication is a more prevalently adopted authentication method with European institutions than in North America. I think proxies seem to be more popular for enabling sort of off network or off campus access for users in North America, and and obviously, the European Union has their GDPR guidelines as well, and I think partly for that reason, European librarians, are more conscious of the authentication method and how it works, and maybe more conscious as well about privacy concerns.
Yep.
That's partly where that's coming from, I think.
Okay. I'm still kind of curious around like moving forward how institutions will be encouraged to get on board and particularly and I want to ask this question the right way, but I mean, there's obviously a compelling business case for publishers to offer seamless access in the sense that, as you mentioned earlier, there's a significant amount of leakage to, legal or illegal free sites and so on. Would there ever be some sort of compliance built into licensing agreements or anything of that, more of an aggressive approach, I guess, to getting institutions on board? Or is this still always going to be voluntary going forward in terms of who wants to do this or not?
I think we have no plans from the Springer Nature end to force anybody into implementing authentication methods if they don't want to. I mean, I think I can't ever see us doing that, and we have no plans to do anything like turn off IP authentication.
Right.
I think it or write into contracts that people must enable federated authentication. There are certainly no plans on this end to force people into selecting an authentication method. I think we have a shared sort of end user and customer in all this, which is the researcher. Between the librarian and between the publisher, and I think we both want to enable their access to legitimate and trusted sources of research. And so I think we can collaborate together on trying to solve that problem for researchers. I think if we fail in doing so, I think that the researchers will understandably get frustrated with the status quo as they are, and they'll start to, and they have other options, right? They can go off and find the content somewhere else online. But
sure,
by sort of not collaborating together or collaboratively solving that problem for researchers together, the risk is that we start to lose the ability to serve that community. So they're going to go off somewhere to find somebody else who can serve them in the way that they want.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about sort of whether federated access is more secure than IP authentication, even two-factor authentication. If so, why? So what is that? What is that security kind of aspect like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if IP is fairly leaky, I mean, if you can get it on an institution's network, and that's the only piece of a credential that you need to then gain access to the content on the publisher sites. And so an individual username and password, as is controlled by the institution, as is required with federated authentication, you could argue is more secure. The truth is, though, I don't really know if that's... I've not really done a lot of analysis to know that that's necessarily the case. You still do often need some kind of credentials to get onto the institution's network. And, somebody, it's still the case that somebody could steal those credentials and make use of them. I think through federated access, you could, an institutional identity provider could require two-factor authentication. When the researcher put in their username and password, they had to also get a code from their sent to their phone and put that in as well. I think that that would make things more secure. However, it would also make the researcher experience more painful. And I think there's always a balance between those two things. You want it to be easy for users, but also secure to a degree. I suppose actually there is one point which does occur to me, which is that with when somebody comes to our websites via IP, we just see that IP. Nobody on either the publisher's end or the institution's end sees anything more granular than this is a user on this IP. And there's maybe more potential for, it makes it more difficult if there is abuse to track down that abuse to sort of an individual or an individual set of credentials, whereas that could be made easier through federated access, because you have somebody putting in their individual credentials as a means of authentication. So any cases where you have people putting in individual credentials, it maybe at least makes tracking back the source of that abuse easier, either on the publisher side or the institution side.
Okay. And then curious, I mean, if whether you've, as a publisher, kind of looked at sort of the activity of researchers or end users in general in terms of device usage, and how they're accessing sources and resources, and for example, whether an end user might be doing research on multiple devices, and how that might impact or not impact their ease of access using seamless access.
Yeah, there's research that's been done over the years here at Springer Nature. I think we've seen a growth in access of our content delivery platforms through mobile devices, mobile phones, or tablets. That's grown over the last 5 to 10 years, but it's also plateaued out to a certain extent. I think new sort of journeys have emerged for researchers. Some where they're on the go and they want to do a little bit of work, maybe just to, they're on Twitter, for example, and somebody links off to an article and they want to take a quick look at it, and then maybe store that article for later, for example. So I think there are sort of on the go journeys for accessing research content. But I think that the content itself often requires a lot of attention and thought to digest. And so I think we've heard from a lot of researchers that they still sit down, they're accessing this professionally through their work and not sort of in convenient pleasure time. So they still use their laptops when they're at work, or their desktops when they're at work to access that content. They want to manage the files they get as well. So I think that's why we've seen a plateauing of mobile use. So new experiences have emerged, but that's fundamental, using this content, it works, and on my work laptop or my work desktop still persists.
Okay. So then in terms of like the credentialing process, I guess that would maybe at most happen, the researcher would need to do that twice, I guess, depending on how many devices they might be using.
Are you thinking in the case of the seamless access experience specifically?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, the the persistence parts of seamless access, where the institutional selection is persisted across participating service provider or publisher sites. That's stored in the local browser storage. So if you went through that experience once on your laptop and then went through it went to your phone, you wouldn't see the persisted institution there on your phone. You'd have to go through it and do it again for your institutional selection to be persisted in your browser and to get that eased experience.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Laird, that's all I have. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us on the program.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's very nice to speak with you. Thanks for the questions.
You just heard from Heather Flanagan, Program Director at seamlessaccess.org, and Laird Barrett, Digital Product Manager at Springer Nature. If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice, and if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.